everybody. I'm just so happy to be here with all the TEDsters and all the foodies. Many of you I know, some of you I don't yet. And what a great museum and great speakers. As you heard, I'm Mari Gallagher. I have 18 minutes exactly to hopefully impart an idea worth sharing. So I'm going to jump right in. The big idea is truth and data for the public good. Now, that sounds pretty simple, it really is, but the truth of the matter is that good data, information, and so on is not always readily available. And the truth that's given to us by the media, by politics, who knows, by people on the right, on the left, is sometimes twisted because of a special agenda or a belief system and so on. And what I'm saying here tonight is that this should change, and that if it does, even more so, it could really help not only our planet, but all the different things we care about on the planet, like our food, our health, our communities, our vitality, and so on. So food and health, how can data improve them? I want to start with just a little personal story about my hard lessons on location, which I realized food and health, location, 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 it sure does impact food and health, and it impacts many, many other things besides just real estate. Location. When I first started out in the field, I was actually a community development practitioner, and I worked in a business district on the far southeast side of the city that was neglected, falling apart. It had a vacant lot in the center of the business district, and about a week before I was hired, I was very green back then, green in a different way than we're talking tonight, I suppose. A man was actually chased down through the lot and beaten to death, and so that was my initiation to my new job. And part of what we were trying to figure out is how do we make this business district better? So one of the things we decided to do was to build a garden. And we couldn't get a business to go in this lot. So remember, I don't want to date myself too much. I like to think I look young. But this was like 20-some years ago, so a long time ago, especially in that neck of the wood. What was a community garden about? It was actually very controversial for lots of reasons. And people said, you know, nothing good can grow in that garden. Nothing really good is growing in that business district. Things are really bad all over, and what you really have is a big location problem. So in the end, we were able to move this garden forward after we basically agreed to keep it locked and to keep a big gate around it and to basically not let anybody but us little gardeners go in. And so that was how we eventually moved the project forward. And I want to tell you that people did sneak in to the garden, and I'm not making this up. They actually brought little step stools sometimes, little plastic things you can get at what used to be called a dime store, and would hop over the fence. And this happened more and more, and so we would actually go into the garden and we would see that people must have been there when we weren't there because new kinds of plants were being planted. People actually came in and they planted vegetables. They started doing their own kind of thing in the garden. It was really pretty cool, and eventually everybody they were all in agreement that we could unlock the garden, open the gates, and have people come in. Now that seems like a very simple thing, but I was thinking about it. It was very hard at the time, and it's kind of interesting that research for the public good also faces some of those same challenges. And so that's what research for the public good is. It's open, accessible, it's neutral, it's a safe place to come together around data and information that hopefully can do some good, even though people might interpret it or experience it a little bit differently. As you heard from our great MC, we did come out with a report in 2006 examining the impact of food deserts on public health in Chicago. What is this food desert thing? I get a Google alert every time somebody uses that word or phrase, food desert, and I actually saw a Google alert, I'm in a food desert, Whole Foods doesn't have my favorite sushi or something. Well, nothing like a great term to get misused, but that's okay. It's kind of used out there in lots of ways, but we define a food desert as a large geographic area that clusters, that has no or distant mainstream grocery stores. So that's a food desert. It's very hard to find. You can find food, but not necessarily healthy food. It's like if you're going through the other kind of desert looking for water and you're struggling. In a food desert, you'll be hard-pressed to find things like, fresh chicken or strawberries or things like that. We did some work not that long ago in Alabama and met kids that had never seen strawberries or grapes. They're 9 years old. These are conditions in food deserts. And here you can see the 3 food deserts in Chicago on mostly the west, south, and far south side of the city. Now, people really did embrace the work. You heard Congressman Bobby Rush help move some stuff forward with the Farm Bill. A lot of different folks doing different things. It was actually very validating. But there was anxiety about coming out with this kind of information. There was some discomfort. There was pressure before we released the report. Can you kind of tone it down a little bit? You try to vet the report a little bit just to get a little feedback. Do you have to have the analysis on race? Is that really, important to do? Questions like that, statements, I suppose at times well-intended, but, fast food will eat you alive. What's so bad about coming out with information that can hopefully point us into the direction of how do you help women and children in the food desert? This is one of those controversial maps at the time. This is the Chicago food desert with the highest third concentration of households headed by single women with children. So if you care about women and children getting nutritious meals and you know that there's areas of the city where access is an issue, then this map might help you go and find them. So we have received a lot of good feedback on data like that, people using it, folks appreciating a map or a little chart like this one, which is the relative distance by race to either a grocery store, which is the icon of the apple or fast food. So data for the public good, and looking at food deserts, many of us come from communities where we have lots of good food all around us, but imagine if you lived in a community like this one that was so saturated with fast food and other kinds of fringe food. Why does it matter? Well, we found that if you live in one of these food deserts in Chicago, for example, and there's problems like this other parts of the country, but here in Chicago, you're more likely to die and suffer prematurely from diabetes and other kinds of diet-related conditions. You're more likely to be obese and so on and so forth after we control for other things. So after we control for income, for race, for education, and so on, we can actually predict how much more death will be because of your location. So the question is, can you choose? And that's a question we can look at, not through whatever bias we may have, or not through, just say no to fast food, to think back to a phrase in the 80s, or, eat your fruits and vegetables, 5, 6, 7, whatever the number today is. In some of these communities, you can't find 1 or 2 vegetables, and when you do, they might cost a whole bunch and not be in very good condition, or it might be in a can with a lot of salt. So can you choose? And how can we have a paradigm shift? How can we go from food desert to food oasis? And this kind of is like that garden I told you about, because it was very hard to visualize something good coming out of that business district. And when you're confronted with a lot of information, it does feel kind of heavy sometimes, like, oh, what are we going to do about this, or we don't want to look at it. But there is a path to a food oasis. And while data and information isn't the be-all, end-all, it does help support that forward movement, we believe. And so there's a lot that we can do, and believe it or not, I actually went to the mayor and gave this same pitch about truth and data for the public good, and I also asked him if instead of using politics to drive resources in Chicago in terms of what grocery stores should be prioritized and given incentives and which ones maybe not, I said, hey, how about using data to direct that change? And given that we have a shrinking budget, right? How many times in the news do we keep hearing about this? So this was like in 2006, 2007. We don't have a lot of resources. So the resources that we have, instead of just having the squeaky wheel direct them or spreading them thinly, why don't we instead use data to identify 6 high-impact sites? And why don't we use data to identify what the public health return is? And so we came up with a metric to do that. So you've heard of years of life loss, which is how many more years of life will a community collectively lose given a certain kind of condition like food deserts or so on, after you control for other things, because we will all die someday, but after you control for other things that influence that kind of outcome, how much does a food desert contribute to that? So we thought it would be much happier and productive if we turned that around and said, well, how much life gain will there be if you make this certain decision with your resources? How much life back? So we can actually be more proactive and try to bring more life and vitality back rather than the other way around. Now, what we find in our work is that every project matters, which is great because many of you are all working on all these different projects. If you go see the exhibits, you can see too, people are working on vertical farms and community gardens and all kinds of wonderful things, farm to fork. So every project matters, and that's a wonderful thing because you, in what you're doing, have a ripple effect on the whole world, and we can understand that spiritually, emotionally, philosophically, ideologically. Our contribution to that discussion is we're trying to understand that mathematically, and what we say is when public resources are being considered, let's understand how much each project matters and support the projects based on how much public health or whatever the measure is, return we're going to get. This is a slide of Chicago's former health commissioner, Dr. Terry Mason, who's really supported our work. Many people have, and we're grateful. And he went out on a very hot day to help us pass out apples for part of National Food Desert Awareness Month. I'm also the founding president of the National Center for Public Research. And this is the community of Roseland. And this community is one of the communities where we, with help from the city and others, identified a site, a priority site, one of the 6 sites for a grocery store. And do you know if that grocery store is actually built and has that healthy food, it would impact 24,000 people? We can count them. And we know from our metrics that it will help bring back collectively about 13 years collectively for just for that community in liver disease, after we control for other things, right? There's other things that contribute to it. 15 years back from diabetes, 58 years back from cancer, certain kinds of diet-related cancer, and 112 years in this little Roseland community from cardiovascular diseases. So we can actually measure that. That's why it's the top priority site, because it has the top impact coming back. So we think this is a good idea, and it's one way to combat food deserts. The really good news, too, is there's not one problem to food deserts, and there's not one solution. So that means everybody can do something, which is all of you and so many more, hopefully, of us. It means everyone can do something, and every project matters, like we talked about. So just imagine the ripple effect if everybody is doing something. Now, there's a lot of programs out there that are claiming to be doing something, and many times they're good, and sometimes even when maybe they're good, there might be a little bit to look at. So we're going to go right into that now with the tagline, the first line of defense against malnutrition in the United States, which is the tagline of the USDA food stamp program. The first line of defense against malnutrition in the United States, I want you to think about that. These stores where you can take your EBT card, your food stamp card, they call it SNAP now. You guys know what I'm talking about, right? Okay. So this is a study we did in Detroit, and one of the key things that we found in the study, aside from just all the death that's occurring there based on food access, is that that data that the USDA has is very accurate in terms of the address, and it's accurate in terms of the name of the store, but it's not so accurate in terms of how it's labeled and how it's indicated it complies with the food stamp program, you know. So I'm going to show you some examples and point out why this is a problem that I hope you'll all care about and hopefully help do something about. This is a USDA food stamp retailer in Detroit that's categorized by the USDA as a supermarket. This one is a medium grocery store. This one is a medium grocery store. This is actually a dollar store, but you, in the data it says it's a specialty store. That's a little category that they use a lot. There's no good food there, some dried noodles and so on. This is a specialty store. You can go in and get live catfish, and then they also have a restaurant, so technically they say you're buying it raw, so you use your EBT card, then they fry it up for free or for a surcharge, and this is the same kind of place. Very bold out there. I'm not talking about kind of, you know, a few bad apples underground. Lots of places, maybe even the communities where you live, even if you live in areas where you have good grocery stores, look around and see what else you have in terms of the first line of defense against malnutrition. So very concerned about this. The reason why we're concerned is we look at the magnitude of it. In Detroit, 92% of all USDA food stamp retailers are a fringe provider. They're gas stations or party stores, things like that. Only 8% are places that have more or less healthy food. Some of them they just make the mark. So we spent some time recoding data, USDA data and so on, still waiting for thank you note. Not sure gonna get it. But we you know, put it together in charts, and you know, we have shared it with them. This chart you can see pretty easily. We use the red bars. Red is bad and blue is good, not a political statement, just how we pick the colors. But you see that we do a lot of recoding, and so they don't have these categories in the original data. It usually says something nicer happier, like medium grocery store or small grocery store. So 2 quick facts about Detroit as we kind of digest what I'm sharing about the data and first line of defense and so on. Detroit, the Motor City, is also the potato chip capital of the world. In Detroit, they consume more potato chips on a per capita basis, presumably, than any place else on the planet. And the obesity rate is 50% higher than the national average. So as we were recoding all this data and waiting for our thank you note, we were wondering, is this the USDA food stamp food pyramid, or is this the food pyramid? And this is probably why I get no note, but one can still wait and hope. All right, jokes aside, why does it matter? Many places we do look at fast food, and I know a lot of you are concerned about fast food, but there's many different kinds of food providers out there. And when we did the study in Detroit, the statistical link, when we looked just at fast food, was really had no bearing. There was no real relationship. The statistically significant increase in death by diet-related diseases in Detroit was linked to USDA food stamp retailers. The first line of defense was making people sicker. It wasn't really a good line of defense at all. So we can actually measure how much more death there is based on that. So big ideas for TED, huh? Two problems. I'm sorry, this is so straightforward, but it needs to be said. 1, raise the standards, and 2, enforce the standards, and 3, use carrots and sticks to help motivate providers to step up with, healthier. How many people think this is just like basically a good idea? Anybody? That this should be done? Okay. Thanks. It's been lonely waiting for my note, so I appreciate it. Now, a lot of people kind of say, well, that's Detroit. They usually whisper that. That means something special. It's just, Detroit has some special problem. Well, hey, this is Chicago. Do you recognize this store? No, this is in your neighborhood. This is Harlem. And this is Savannah, Georgia. And I have more slides, but that'll be for another presentation. There's lots of other places. But I do need to wrap up on some good news. How many of you care about the food deserts in Chicago? What's going on here? Anybody? Anybody following it? All right. Woo. All right. Okay, go back. Okay. So maybe you've seen some of these maps, maybe not, but long story short is in 2006, we identified over 632,000 and some people who lived in the food desert. In 2008, we developed data again, and we saw that the food desert shrunk by 23,000 and some people. And today, and we're just releasing this now as part of this TEDx event, which you are all part of. We've been holding back on this report. It's now up on our website. We have another reduction of about 58,000 and some people. So the food desert is shrinking, and we can use data and information to actually track if we're on, if we're doing well, if we're not, and so on. So it's good news that we can keep people accountable. There's lots of stereotypes out there, and again, that's what data and information can help dispel and kind of put us in that neutral, safe center, like in the garden, where we can actually look at things and kind of wonder about them and be curious and not do it from a place of fear, but do it from a place of neutrality. Ironically, not everybody in the Chicago food desert is poor. Do you know that 12,000 households earn over $100,000 a year? Wow, that's kind of interesting. So people kind of think in stereotypes. The food desert is poor, the food desert is black, the food desert is urban. No, there's food deserts all across the country. And it's an issue. And hopefully good neutral data and information in the spirit of discussion like we have here at TED, and the spirit of action like we talked about with vertical farms, and many other things will help move us forward with a good solid policy imperative, with a community imperative, and with a market imperative. And it's going to take all three to improve food and health and the planet, not just here in Chicago, but everywhere. Thank you.